I'm the Awkward GM Corbin, and today I'm going to be making a tier list based on the antagonist sub-factions and subtypes of Chronicles of Darkness. If you'd like to do it yourself, there'll be a link in the description below. Shout out to our patrons Echo B, The Bohemian, Cookie T, Stephen A, Joshua S, Byron A, Jeremy Z, and Alex. Thank you for supporting the channel. And the tiers are favorite for the ones that I really enjoy, like for the ones that I've used quite a bit and I'm familiar with, want to use for ones that I've never used but I want to use in the future, haven't tried for ones that I just haven't gone around to. I'm not really thinking of them as ones that I want to use, but I'm not against them. Not sold on. These are the ones that I've maybe used in the past, but just haven't really gelled with me. Maybe I'll look back at them in the future, but right now I'm not going to be putting them in my games. And then lastly, what we have here is don't plan on using. These are for the factions that I've used in the past or just have an outright dislike of. Now, I don't plan to use them, but that doesn't mean that they won't be useful for me later on if I decide to go back and give them a second chance. You might be asking yourself, where's that antagonist that I really like? And the reason for this is because I'm not covering all the antagonists in one go. These are specifically for antagonists that are related to the player character splats or supernatural types. So for instance, the Seven Covenant are vampires who hunt other vampires. Similarly, Centimani are Prometheans who have who've decided to go against the pilgrimage and become monsters. So you'll see those, but you won't see things like Pandorans because they're not technically Prometheans, they are technically their own thing. Let's start off with the Seven here. They are the vampires that try to hunt vampires. There's a lot of detail about them in the first edition 7 book. I haven't read that book at all. However, I have read the 2e version, and the 2e version is very lax on what their origin is. So I'm going to put it in the want to use section. That's just because I don't really know much about them and I haven't used them yet in my game, but they're an interesting concept. They're vampires who hunt other vampires. Now we have the pure tribes. Now the pure tribes are ones that I really like to use. They're broken down into 3 sub-factions. You have the Ivory Claws, the Predator Kings, and the Fire Touch. There are probably more, but they aren't really talked about in the core rulebook. What I like about them is they are werewolves who have forsaken Mother Luna and have burned away their sort of tattoos that sort of chain them to Mother Luna, and they actually have their own set of differences, just minor differences though, than normal werewolves. For instance, in Werewolf the Forsaken, Aratha, if they touch silver, they will get slightly burnt, but no damage will be done to them, like mechanically. But for the pure tribes, even touching silver will cause them to burn. I think I'm going to put them in the like it category for the moment. I'm definitely working on them a lot more in my Chronicles of Darkness mixed game because they're currently trying to take over Boston. And maybe they will, and maybe they'll supplant the Forsaken. But for the moment, just right here in like. Oh, it looks like we have the Seers of the Throne. They're Mage related, so they definitely should be going into the don't want to use ever category, but actually I want to use them. They're pretty decent as far as antagonists go, and honestly I sort of trust myself as a storyteller more than I trust players to be playing mages, just because mage characters sort of have like a little bit of a narrative power that's very similar to what the GM can do, which is basically just making up rules as you go and then just rolling dice and saying, oh, this happened. Seers of the Throne are really interesting. I've watched Occultists Anonymous do their Mage the Awakening game with the Seers of the Throne antagonists, and it's pretty interesting. You'll see there are these different powers that they use, these mantles that they wear or robes that they wear to sort of take over people's bodies and things, and there's a lot more depth to them than I thought initially, which is awesome. Now we go to the Centimani. These are the Prometheans who have given up the pilgrimage and have joined the Pandorans and are basically covered in flux or using flux-like abilities, which is the power source that sort of keeps Pandorans alive. They can actually control Pandorans if they use a specific distillation or alembic. Honestly, I really like them. I have tried to get them into my games, but I just haven't. My players, there was a session or a series of sessions that I called Pandoran Pandemonium, and it lasted for quite a while in my game where players were going around finding Pandorans and like taking them out. The last encounter with a Pandoran was going to involve a Centimani, and the players never got to that point. They switched gears and decided to follow a different plot point instead, so the Centimani was never used. Now we go with the Loyalists. The Loyalists from Changeling the Lost, and I've used these guys. I had a Changeling the Lost game, and the first session was against a group of privateer Loyalists who were essentially selling other Changelings back into servitude to the True Fae. Now, do I like them? No, and actually I'm going to put them at the bottom list here in the don't plan on using category, because I just can't see myself ever using them, because they're just sort of the player characters, and there's some moral choices that the players would have to do to try and maybe see if they could rescue the Loyalists from being in service to the True Fae, but honestly they just sort of feel off to me. They don't feel like their own sort of different thing compared to, say, normal changelings. If you were to use a loyalist that is specifically a servant directly to a True Fae, that would fall under this category as well, and they wouldn't have a mantle or a seasonal court, or any of the other courts rather. That being said, though, I wish there was a little bit more to them when they're loyalists. I wish there were some abilities they got from their True Fae master for being loyal to them. Right now, loyalists just don't have anything going for them. Nothing unique anyway. And when I say nothing unique mechanically, I also mean a little bit more in the unique storyline-wise, because as far as I can tell, like for instance, I'm going to touch on this in a little bit, but evil Sin Eaters in Sin Eater, they have different stories and motivations that you can incorporate pretty well. Loyalists, I don't really see that, and I don't know how I would do that myself at the table. You might be seeing Slasher here and wondering, hey, isn't Slasher different? Isn't it its own thing, not part of Hunter the Vigil or anything? And actually, in first edition, it was its own book, but in second edition, it got looped in with Hunter the Vigil, and what we got was essentially whenever a hunter reaches 0 integrity points, they have a chance of becoming a slasher, which is essentially a supernatural serial killer, or doesn't have to be supernatural. They sort of start mundane and then can become supernatural over time. That being said, they're one of my favorite antagonist types, because you're basically taking the normal mortal template and giving it a mortal plus. It's sort of like a little bit of a boon that they get. One of my favorite ones to use, because there are 10 different types of slashers. There are 5 mundane types and 5 supernatural types, and the supernatural types are just chef's kiss. They are stuff like the Mask, who only takes 1 point of damage whenever it's attacked, unless that damage happens to be environmental. And one of my favorite things is making my own slasher types, because they're just so evil. They are baked into the characters. They're supposed to be irredeemable a lot of the time, though I believe the mundane ones can be redeemed up to a point. Now we have the enemy bound. Now, Sin Eaters aren't the overarching classification of Sin Eaters. They're actually called bound. It's whenever a Geist takes the place of a soul of a mortal, it creates a bound. It's only the Sin Eaters decide to use that power for social good and helping ghosts and such. Sin Eaters are great. Bound, not so much. Bound are sort of I call them the Tyrants in this image, because there is an optional rule for bound to use instead of synergy with their Geist, tyranny with their Geist, which means that instead of being symbiotic, it's more of a parasitic relationship, with the mortal half being tyrannical over the Geist half. These people are like the bone pickers, who are people who use their powers for financial gain. They will use it for, say, talking to a dead person and finding where their money is hidden and stuff like that. There are 3 different types that are talked about in the book, but basically they are sin eaters with a evil bent to them, and I like them a lot. I haven't tried them, so I'm going to say haven't tried on that. I do like the concept of them. I might want to use them in the future, but right now they're not something that I feel necessary to incorporate into my game. Now we have the Shuoxen, which are basically called Bane mummies. They are the mummy followers of Amut. Most of them are old slaves who died due to the rite of return that created the other Arisen. I like the Shuoxen a lot. They're not one of my favorites, but I do like using them. What they can do is they can sort of hint to things in the past. They can't state them outright because they have a ban that if they don't follow, then their soul is forfeit to Amut, and Amut's going to devour them. The Shuoxen can sort of hint to things in the past that the mummy doesn't remember and sort of torment the mummy, because Shuoxen have eidetic memory and the mummy doesn't. However, they aren't as powerful as mummies, only because they don't have access to utterances. It's made up for with the fact that they have things called Bane rites, which are rites that cause chaos and mass destruction. They're a lot less focused and a lot less controlled, and you have to make them up on your own. That's the only downside I have for them at the moment, because while I like them, I don't like having to homebrew a lot. But other than that, they're really good for having them as an antagonist for characters who are specifically mummies. You could have them as antagonists for normal players, but just so you know, Shuoxen have the thing that mummies do, which is they don't die easily. So if your players want to kill their villains, Shuoxen is probably not for them. But honestly, the power level that a Shuoxen has at a base level isn't that high compared to, say, like a gangrel vampire with Promethean or something. Perfectly fine if you want to have something that's more of a political enemy or a social enemy than something that is going to walk down the street and try and kill your players. Though that would be like a Terminator thing. Gives real good Terminator vibes now that I think about it. This one is hard to call a enemy splat. The Insurgent Agency. Now, you know I love me some good demon. Insurgent agencies are essentially demonic organizations that serve the God Machine, but they do so unknowingly. And that's where it sort of falls apart for me, and I'm not sold on them, really, because whenever I've tried to use agencies in the past, the players don't really get attached to them as well as they get attached to, say, a Vampire Covenant or for instance, one of the orders in Mage. Like, the agencies are interesting, but it's very hard to get your players to sort of trust the agency because of all these spy novels and hitman games and stuff like that where, oh, you're working for this organization. Well, the organization betrays you. Well, of course they will, because they're spies and spies can't be trusted. So having the insurgent agencies is a neat idea. I just don't really see myself ever using them because it seems like it's very hard to do the you have demons fighting other demons, but what they're actually doing is fighting the other demons because they're being corrupted from the inside. As soon as that corruption is weeded out, like, everything should be fine, but there's all this stuff going on here. Originally, I was going to put the Integrator demons into this list, but Integrator demons are demons who fell but still think they can save the God Machine, so I give them a little bit more leeway in not being an antagonistic sub-faction or subtype. Insurgent agencies, though, they are definitely an antagonist sub-faction. It's just they're not doing anything different. They don't have any mechanical changes different to them. Their lore is essentially they've been duped by the God Machine to work in the God Machine's favor, which seems difficult, especially considering that demons can see God Machine infrastructure, and there should be a way for them to sort of figure things out if this is if this is a insurgent agency that they're working for. In any case, those are my thoughts on that, and it's sad for a game that I really do enjoy. Lastly, what we have here are the Devoted. Now, the Devoted are deviants that are devoted to the conspiracy that created them, or the conspiracy that found them. Now, I just haven't tried them. They're an interesting idea. They're basically what would have happened if the Deviants stayed with their conspiracy. Mechanically, they have, I believe, the touchstones reversed, depending. Essentially, their loyalty touchstone is the conspiracy, if I remember correctly. There's a little bit of a mechanical difference with how their instability works, because I think the conspiracy can actually fix it, or at least maintain it in some way. That being said, I just haven't tried them. Deviant is one of the games that I've had players use, but as far as the Devoted go, I've had plot hooks that relate to them. But honestly, the rules to make a Devoted, if I use the Deviant rules, they're very complicated, and I need to hammer that down when I do Theo's make a character in Deviant. So right now they're just probably going to sit on the haven't tried, and maybe I'll try them out sometime in the future, but for the moment they're just going to be sitting on the back burner. I've tried making this list multiple times, and there have been slight adjustments here, but slashers and pure tribes have been in the same spots that they've always been in. Slashers winning out as my favorite just because how versatile they are and how they can be used to create even more interesting mortal antagonists than any of the other books have, I believe. It's good to have them. They can be very interesting, and they run the gambit of like social antagonists to definitely like the physical attacker type antagonists. Whereas for something like the Loyalists to me are just player characters. There's not much interesting to them. There's not much that has sort of been evolved about them. Any one of these factions could have, any one of the player factions or supernatural types could have traitors within their midst. So what makes the Loyalists different than just normal traitors? Not much. So that's sort of why they got sent to the bottom of the list here. Maybe in the future someone will put out a supplement that makes Loyalists a lot more interesting, but for the moment they're going to be at the bottom of the list for me. I might look back at them in the future, but who knows. Again, if you'd like to fill out this tier list, you can click the link below and go there and make your own. Or if you want to support the channel, you can go to the Patreon page or Ko-fi and donate through PayPal. The patrons I want to thank for helping me come up with this idea. I gave them a sort of survey of video ideas I've come up with over the year, and they decided that this was one they wanted to see, so I've putting it up here. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a good one, and there's probably a video here that's AI generated or something. It's been perfectly picked for you.